let's get scratching.
We got an explosive broadcast coming to you. Listen up. Sega games, just keep playing them. Sega!
We're back. It's the SEGAbits Swingin Report Show live. Get ready for Sega interviews and news.
I stand still alone that twilight. Outside of city lights I found something like a ship without.
Hello and welcome to the SEGAbits Swingin Report Show live. I'm Barry, and let's actually look at my face here. Still working on having that beautiful music playing while I'm talking here, but we've got to get to it. We have an interview for this show. I am going to be joined by Steve Lakowitz very shortly. Before we do that, though, I do want to remind people we are on Patreon. That is our only sponsor for this episode. We don't have like Dollar Shave Club or like Keeps or all those, I don't know, all those strange ones like BetterHelp. None of that stuff. If anything, if I could choose one, it would probably be Goo Gone, which is really great for cleaning like dirty cartridges. And I'm really into Bang energy drink right now because I don't get much sleep anymore. But without further ado, let's bring on our special guest, Steve. There you are.
Hey, what's up?
Say hello to the nice folks.
Hello to the nice folks.
I never say that. So, Steve, your music name, I did not pronounce it yet because I completely forgot to ask you. How do I pronounce it? Because I don't want to butcher it.
It's just ap0c.
Okay, that's what I've been saying for years. Okay.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad.
Have you ever had like? We have ap0c here.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if someone said that. Yeah. I mean, that would be cooler, I guess, than ap0c at this point.
ap0c. So what? Boy, how do I begin? What do you do?
I mean, well, I mean, I do a lot of things. For music and stuff, though, I guess I would say that it's really, I just kind of make music, but I use older consoles and use lots of different kinds of older consoles. And I really try to make sure that it, kind of preserves the older tradition of how hardware music was made, and I do that across, Mega Drive, NES, MSX, lots and lots of different things. So it's kind of making music with old technology, I guess.
Awesome. And what games would people listening have possibly played or are looking forward to playing that you've worked on?
Well, right now I'm working with, I'm the composer for Brock Crocodile, so I'm sure some people here are familiar with that, at least because it's a Sega, kind of a Sega fan game that isn't one. That's kind of a labor of love. It's really fun to work on. I'll be working on Dead Horizon 2, which will be coming out. I think it's probably going to come out in 2022. I have a bunch of projects right now that are like super can't talk about them, but it could be really exciting. So I've been in the background of a lot of other work. I usually kind of do sound work for other folks. That was my bigger gig for a very long time. I also work with Brave Wave, the company out in Japan, and just kind of I'm their guy when it comes to anything that needs to be transformed into older, authentic chiptune music. They usually kind of tag me. So I think at this point I'm more known a little bit for that kind of stuff, but I'm hoping to be more well known as a game composer very, very shortly. I think some things are going to blow up. So
that's awesome. That's really awesome. Well, we could definitely have you back on once those things start blowing up. But let's move backwards in time now. So obviously you like video games. You play them. You know your stuff. But what would you say are some of your earliest game memories? Like, were you a Sega kid, a Nintendo kid?
I guess I was kind of a Nintendo kid who wanted to be a Sega kid. I think that there's a certain group of people who probably fell into that category. Because I had an NES, and it's actually a pretty cool story. I really wanted an NES, and my parents always just kind of said no, and which is kind of the typical thing. We had like an Atari 2600 in the house, which my dad would just like collect more games from garage sales for. Like we had massive amounts of like garage sale, weird half working 2600 games. But eventually, they kind of, my parents kind of bent to my will, and they got the NES. But it was really cool. They set it up and put it in like the laundry, like they put it in the laundry room or whatever. And then they actually, my dad, who knows a decent amount about technology, like daisy chained the two AV wires, so that they were like kind of super long. And then, so, on Christmas, we thought nothing was going on or whatever. I went to go turn on the TV, and it was like the Mario and Duck Hunt screen. Because there was like no Nintendo there or anything. I'm like, what the heck is going on? And yeah, they'd set up the Nintendo, like, pretty much 20 feet away in a different room. And that was like, surprise, we bought the Nintendo. That's like one of my, favorite childhood gaming memories. But, I did that. I eventually got into Super Nintendo. Still kind of like wanting Sega products. It's always interesting because I was always kind of like renting Segas, or renting a Genesis from like the local video store. It's like a thing you could do. You could put down a deposit, and then you could rent it for the weekend or something. So I was always playing like Sonic 1. But eventually I got one. I got a Genesis 2 on that generation. I got that, like, if you remember, there was like that crazy Costco bundle, which was like 2 6-button controllers and like columns and Sonic 2 or something like that for like, I don't know, that, everything my entire life as a kid was from Costco. So I'm assuming that's how I got my Sega there. But I mean, like, that's pretty much like very early my gaming history. It was really kind of NES, eventually Super Nintendo, and then Genesis, kind of at the same time. Okay,
yeah. On past shows, George and I, like on Sega Talk and on Swingin Report Show, we would talk about Nintendo fans, and it was like a lot of them did want to be Sega fans, and I did not know many Sega fans, or I don't want to say fans, but like console owners who were like, oh, I really want to get a Nintendo. I don't know, I've never really met that many people that had them. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's a pride thing, like Sega fans kind of either knew that they were missing out on something, but they didn't want to admit it, because Sega was the underdog at the time. I know, for me, I didn't really realize that they were separate companies. I thought maybe you could get a Mario game on a Genesis, and because they were just characters, they're all video games, so I didn't really understand that. It was like you can buy VCRs from different companies. They all play the same tapes. It's not like there's the Sony tape that only plays on the Sony VCR. So it was a strange concept to me, but as I started to become more aware of different consoles, I became also aware of just like weird differences. So like, for example, the SNES had this weird effect where it looked 3D to me. And I was like, why can't my Genesis do this? They both say 16-bit. Why is that? But then you also have like the sound of the SNES. So I know people that either love the sound, hate the sound, are indifferent. Where do you fall when it comes to like the sound of the SNES?
I love it. I mean, it's kind of, it has limitations. It can be very bright, I think, in terms of, sound effects and just the instruments. It's also about the utilization of the instruments too. I think they were really bent itself on being kind of either something with a lot of guitars in it, or something with lots of lush strings, with that kind of like vibrato effect that happens when you kind of take a sample, like you do, like SNES is sample based audio, and you take a sample and you loop it, so you get that kind of lilting and very echoey and washy kind of feel. Like I just think about like the opening of Link to the Past is a great example of like using all of the effects. Like you got the thunder and the wishy, like the music that's playing. So it can be very atmospheric. Like Super Metroid is a great example of a super atmospheric music. So I appreciate almost every game console down to like the beeper and the ZX Spectrum. So but I like the Super Nintendo sound. I wish there was a tracker or an easy way to do it without having to kind of move mountains to make music for it, because I would definitely do it.
So, I mean, am I just being a biased Sega fanboy when I like think that I hear a lot of SNES music that also has a Genesis equivalent, like it's the same game, same music tracks, but for different consoles, and I almost always go for the Genesis. And maybe that's wrong, but I sometimes feel like some SNES music is like overly produced, or it's almost like they've been given so many tools that they use all the tools to the point where you're almost like there's like strange sound effects playing, and they've got like it feels like twice as many instruments going at the same time, but then you show me like, I don't know, like Ninja Turtles Hyperstone Heist is an example. I prefer that soundtrack to similar tracks in, I think it's Turtles in Time is the equivalent game. I mean, am I being a biased fanboy, or would you say there are music tracks on SNES games that just maybe they go too far? They don't know how to hold back when they're given all these tools.
It's interesting, and that's a good point, because like that's a great example of one where Hyperstone Heist is definitely a better soundtrack. It just is, by far. And a lot of these games, like, were in the arcades, were FM games, FM with PCM, so that would be like FM and something that kind of sounds like Super Nintendo but not. So we're more used to that. Like the original like Turtles arcade game or whatever is all FM, and it's really bombastic. You can't do bombast on the Super Nintendo. It's not really built for that kind of bombast. So yeah, it lacks the punch. There's so many great examples, like Brandish, which is a game that was on Super Nintendo, but it was also on PC 88 and PC 98, which is an FM based console that, long story short, without getting into too much detail, basically the same sound chip in a lot of ways as the Sega Genesis Mega Drive. And there's no contest that the versions on the PC 88 and 98 are better than the Super Nintendo one. The Super Nintendo one sounds just like, it just lacks the punch, And like, there's a difference between kind of like, even like great composers like Motoi Sakuraba and people like that, who, when they write for, FM, are thinking about crazy FM instruments and just, and otherwise when you write for Super Nintendo, it's like, okay, I pick flute 2. A lot of the stuff is from Roland sample sets. And so you don't get to customize it as much. And I feel like that's where, and like, so that's good and bad though. Like thinking about like Zombies Ate My Neighbors is a good example. It sounds really funny on Super Nintendo. And there's some of the tracks on the Genesis version that I just like, they hurt my ears. No offense to any of the composers of the game, but I really prefer some of the Super Nintendo tracks versus the Genesis tracks. It really just depends on how much effort was put in. And a lot of games were Sega games first, and then they were transferred over, like Langrisser 2 became Der Langrisser, stuff like that. And the Sega version, there's no contest, is much better. The Mega Drive version is better. So.
Exactly. And I wanted to touch too on FM sound. So, there's terms out there that video game fans will hear, like blast processing, things like that, and they'll talk about it like they know what they're talking about. I feel like FM sound, I don't know if it's maybe becoming a little more mainstream now because we're getting a lot of soundtracks coming out that will designate, oh, you get the FM sound version. For people listening who do not know, who say they know what FM sound is, but they actually don't know what FM sound is, could you explain it in the most simplest terms? That Michael Scott where he's like, explain it to me like I'm a 10-year-old, and he's like, now explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old or something like that. Like, what's the easiest way to explain what that means?
This is the problem with FM. I've done panels on FM sound. I've written things about FM sound. I've done podcasts on FM sound. It is very difficult to distill into one particular way of describing it. I say that one, it's not a sample sound, so it's not something that's pre-recorded or pre-designed that you use. You have to actually make it, and it really is just like, for lack of a better term, and FM guys are always really careful about how to describe this stuff. So I'm going to just make sure that I describe it in a way that infuriates them. But it really is just like four different sets of algorithms that work together. And they all have different like attack, delay, decay, ASDR, and so what you do is you can set them for all four of them, and then you basically put them all in a row and you shove the sound through it. So, it would be kind of like, this sound makes it a little tinier, this sound makes it a little louder, and you have four of them basically, and you can arrange them however you want. So I press the key down, it's the C, it's a C, like, whatever C you want it to be. It goes through four boxes of mystery, and that's what the note is basically. And so it basically allows you to customize everything from, the attack to, how many attacks there are. It's like four instruments playing at once, and they can either work with each other, work against each other, work in a row, work all at the same time. So, that's to explain it as a 10-year-old. Explain it as a 5-year-old it's very complicated. That's the answer. And it's a complicated thing. It's so funny. So one of the guidebooks, and I said this on my panel when I was at MagFest a couple years ago, one of the guidebooks that tells you how to make FM for Deaflmask, which is one of the big FM chiptune trackers that folks use, basically set in the FM category, basically says, FM's complicated, ask someone else. And the tracker that everyone else uses. So it is math. There's math involved, and there's some thought involved. If you want to, you can make different kinds of instruments, and you just, you can make things from that like twangy bass that everyone loves to like those like really like kind of farty kind of trumpety sounds. But I mean, it really is to make those sounds. Someone's turning a bunch of knobs until it sounds like something.
I see.
And yeah, and so for Super Nintendo, like a lot of the folks, like even for like Uematsu or any of those guys who are at working on the Final Fantasy games, they had sound sets from Akai and from Roland, and they just said, I like Trumpet 3, that's the one I'm going to use, and that's it. What I mean? And like the Super Nintendo has effects, like it has super cool echo effects and some kind of re-triggering effects, but that's what it is. So it's more like MIDI. That's like, it's Super Nintendo's not MIDI, don't get me wrong, but it's more like MIDI than your Mega Drive is. Your Mega Drive is more analog. It's more akin, it's more related to what the sounds that comes out of a Nintendo than it is the sounds that come out of a Super Nintendo. Someone's going to kill me for saying that, but that's my understanding of it as it is. It is a sound chip that produces its own kind of instruments and sounds.
So is there any notable pieces of hardware that people might have in their own homes or have imported that has FM sound? I mean, I can name a few, but I wanted you to. Oh,
man. So Sound Blaster is actually an FM chip. So the old Sound Blaster on DOS is FM. So a lot of it, like Doom, remember Doom? Like when you guys, anyone who played Doom probably played it on a Sound Blaster 16. That is FM as well, unless you played it. There's all kinds of versions of it. You could play Doom on pretty much anything.
Right.
Other things that have FM sound, if you have a Mark III or Sega Mark III has the OPLL in it. So if you're lucky enough to have a Mark III with the FM sound unit, you'd have it. The Sega Master System, the Japanese one, also has that in it. The list goes on and on and on. Most of the games, a lot of actually the pinball games you played probably have the YM2151 or 2151, which is known as the OPM. So like Black Knight has PCM, but also has FM sound of the pinball game Black Knight. FM sound was ubiquitous in basically a lot of the games we played, especially in the arcades. It was PCM and stuff like that, like Super Nintendo, that was a newer technology, which eventually led to like Red Book Audio and things like that. So, there's so many things that had FM in it that you'd be surprised. I mean, you probably listened to a lot more FM than even NES music when you were a kid and you were a Nintendo kid.
That's interesting. So when you're moving into like the Genesis era, and then you mentioned Genesis 2, the big difference between those two, people always say, is the sound. And it seems like the sound of a Genesis has never really been perfected after the Model 1, when you have different pieces of hardware, when you have the little handhelds that still take cartridges, but they're like made in Brazil, things like that. What is the reason? Is it impossible to replicate the sound, or is it just companies being cheap?
Okay. So you opened up a can of worms here, Barry. So the Model 1, there's huge schools of thoughts about this. In general, the Model 1 Sega Genesis, the very original Sega Genesis, and the Mega Drive, the V00 and V01 all have a discrete FM sound chip. And what that means is that the FM sound chip is, like, if you open it up, you'll find a OPN2, which is the YM. I'm blanking out here. YM2612. YM2612. Wow, sorry, it's late here. But you'd have the YM2612. So if you opened up and if you have an older model Sega Genesis, you'll have the main Motorola 68000 processor, and then you'll see a literal chip that will say YM26121. So the thought is that back in those older models have a better sound because the sound chip is discrete. It's by itself. Once you start to get into, and I'm talking off the top of my head, I know people have written books about this, so hopefully it's not incorrect. But I think once you get past VA4 or revision 4 through 6 has pretty much has a discrete YM2612. But once you get to revision 7, which is right about the time they start to make the Genesis 2, they start to make a combined ASIO, or not ASIO, combined, but basically a combined chip. So they take the Motorola 68000 and combine it with the the sound chip. So it's one big chip that has everything in it, and that's usually where the sound kind of goes downhill. Simply because it's not mixed correctly. They put different things in there that makes the sound a little bit muddier, and so purists usually say like anything like the bigger, high definition graphics model. It says high definition graphics around it, tends to have the discrete, discrete OPN2, so it has a better sound. It's true. I mean, the Sega Genesis 2 stuff kind of sounds like garbage. It's definitely muddier, and it's interesting. I never even knew this until I went over to like a friend's house and we were playing his old Genesis, and I'm like, it didn't sound like this to me. It did like we were playing Streets of Rage, and it's just like there's like so many more timbres that I wasn't hearing. Like if you played Genesis 3, you got really screwed. That was like some of the worst sound. Nomad was pretty much the same thing as Genesis 3, except it's really loud. I don't know if you've tried to play with the headphone jack on a Nomad, but like turn it up just a little bit, it's like super loud. Yeah. And then there's the one, I think Majesco is the company that took over for, like they made a small amount of Genesis 2s right at the end of its life. I think it was Majesco. And I don't know if you've ever seen one of them, but it's like a Sega Genesis 2, but the actual logo is gray. The Genesis logo is gray. Yeah. And those actually have a really cool sound because they're actually mixed very cleanly. They don't sound better than like a discrete older Sega Genesis model, but they do sound, they're very clean. So it's actually very good for recording if it's modded. So yeah, I mean, it just depending on when you bought into Sega Genesis, you could have heard it completely differently. That's not really true with like Nintendo or Super Nintendo. It's really just the Sega thing. So it's interesting. That
is interesting. Yeah, I grew up having a Genesis Model 1, like very early model, so it definitely has that Yamaha, whatever you said. Yeah.
FM is complicated, okay?
Yeah, FM trademarked. And I had the Nomad, which I listened to a lot on the headphones because I used it in the car a lot. I did not get a Sega Game Gear until much later, and it was the Majesco model. And I have like some of my earliest articles, probably 12, 13 years ago on my old blog, The Nomad Junkyard. I was writing about the Majesco model, and I was like going through a list of things that made it actually better than the original hardware. I don't remember ever talking about the sound, but I did note that it had a slightly better screen. So there's that, but it is interesting that, for as much flack as like those third-party companies that have the hardware licensed out, Majesco actually didn't do that bad a job. And I also think that a lot of the carts you see floating around for certain games, like I think Miss Pac-Man on the Game Gear, like they had a handful of games that they re-released, and they're floating around there. So when you go out and you pick up like Sonic Chaos or Miss Pac-Man, it's more often going to be a Majesco release than an original Sega one, just because it was released later, so it's likely to be in better condition, and they might have even released more of them. So I don't know what the numbers are for like their hardware releases, but it would be interesting to learn if Majesco actually, maybe met or exceeded the amount that Sega released, maybe for the Genesis 2 or something like that. But it can definitely be a headache dealing with Sega hardware as opposed to Nintendo. There's so much more of it. I mean, I've been collecting for decades, and I still don't own a Genesis 2 or 3. I see them all the time, and I'm like, do I need it? No. But yeah, you've picked up quite a few pieces of hardware over the years. You've shown me some. What are you into right now? You talk a lot. There's a pinned picture on your Twitter account. No. Let me bring it up here actually. But you can describe to the audio listeners what I'm going to be bringing up here.
Well, I like to collect old computers, and I decided to one day kind of figure out what I actually had, and it's a lot more than I thought. And yeah, it's an addiction. It's a problem. I'm here to discuss my problems now. It's just, yeah, I collect MSX computers, and it's something I got into. I used to collect, oddly enough, I used to collect Sega Master System games. I got like really, really far in collecting all those, and it's just like those last couple pieces were just so frustrating. Like, oh yeah, there we go. There's my mess. But yeah, I mean, I just, it's really interesting because it just, the MSX platform, or is really interesting computers, and they were kind of similar to our IBM compatible, and so much that it was just kind of a brand standard. And you could see there's all kinds of different colors, systems, shapes, companies that made them, and so it's just super fascinating. There's super rare ones that people didn't. I mean, it was funny because it was like the third or fourth most popular computer in Japan. So it wasn't really like a big, huge draw or anything. But there's just so many cool systems and such a cool history to it, because it was a kind of a computer that was backed by Microsoft to try to invade the Asian markets. And NEC was kind of top dog at the time, and Fujitsu. So it's interesting because it's just, the original stuff was all backed by Microsoft money. And so there's so many weird and interesting MSXs that kind of pop up from there. In different companies and different colors. It's funny too, because you talk about how the Sega Genesis has different sounds. Depending on which MSX you had, you could actually have different colors because the VDPs were different. The visual display processor, video display processors were different in some of them slightly. So some of them are known for having better reds. Some of them, it's a whole thing. It's just as nerdy as anything that you'd see in the kind of Sega forum or anything.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. So are you producing? I know you pick up hardware not only because you're a collector, you enjoy it, but you also pick up hardware to produce your music. Correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what is the process behind that? Like when let's say you get something off of eBay or a Japanese equivalent, and it arrives, and you plan to make music on that. Like, what's your process?
So, I mean, luckily with MSX, it's for example, I have flash carts, and flash carts are usually the gateway to making sure that whatever you're producing can go onto the console. You can MIDI control consoles too. You can just literally, use a keyboard to make a console sing. There's all kinds of boards for that. But if you want to play back like an original track or arrangement or something that you made like outside or non-native to the computer, you usually use a flash cart to take your file and bring it over. So I have a flash cart for my MSX. I have an older EverDrive that I use for my Sega Genesis Mega Drive work. I have some kind of crazy contraption for my Famicom when I do Famicom work. I mean, so that's the process. You just kind of you compose everything on the computer, then you can just bring it over on a flash cart, and there's already built into EverDrive and some other things, that lets you basically do that. The same thing that lets you play any VGM file. I'm physically putting VGM files that I made onto the console and just running them.
That's interesting. So you do very little like opening the console up, if at all.
Oh yeah. It's all on the flash cart. I mean, there are people who are like smarter than me and cooler than me probably who do that kind of stuff.
Right.
But I always consider myself to be kind of like, I'm a fierce collector, but kind of a so-so engineer. And I when it comes to that kind of stuff, I let the smart people do their work. And if they have an extra copy, I try to buy it from them or something and make like cool stuff. Because there's so many smart people producing so many cool things out there, and I'd rather just be able to boost them. I don't have the brain for that kind of stuff.
Right. So when you started doing chiptune music, was there a scene that you latched onto? Like, how did you go about going from like learning how to do it to actually saying, well, I want to perform this in front of people? Was it a lot of it like on the internet, or did you know people IRL around you?
I didn't actually. I kind of was doing it in my own like little box. Like I had no clue what I was doing, and I was just messing around with it. And I'd really gotten into. I guess I was writing a blog which is called Classical Gaming, which is still up, I think. Unfortunately, I won't give a URL, but I think I have. There's a lot of edits I need to make to it now that I know a lot more. But I was doing that blog years and years and years ago, and I was just really discovering sound chips. Like I was looking at the different kinds of sound chips inside of the Mega Drives, and all the expansion audio chips for Famicom, and it was really fun. And so what I did is there was out here. I'm from Philadelphia. There's Brauhaus Schmidt, or not Brauhaus Schmidt. There's the what's that other place? The basically. Yeah, the beer
It's
garden
outside.
place.
Yeah.
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 Why can't I remember off the top of my head here? But anyway, we're doing one of those like geek nights where like someone comes and talks and drinks. And I applied for it, and they're like, "Yeah, sure, go up there and talk about sound chips." And, I was already kind of composing a little bit I was doing like my I don't know, bad Famicom music on the side or whatever. I did that, and Paul Weinstein was in the audience, who is Chipocrit, and some people probably know who Chipocrit is. And he's like, "Who are you, and why don't I know who you are?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, you're talking about exactly the things that like a bunch of other people in the city are, but how do we not know who you are? Like, why don't you come to 8 Static or any of these other events?" I'm like, "What are you even talking about? Like, there's actually people in Philadelphia that like this stuff." I just thought I was like making this in a vacuum. But there was like Philly is one of the chiptune scenes. Like there's Philly, New York. There's stuff going on in Detroit. There's the Florida scene. So Philly is like on the map for chiptune, and I had no clue. And I was just like fumbling in the dark here with my own articles and stuff about chiptune. When actually like one of the people that I was using to build my articles was known then as Explode 2A03. And that guy used to have all these crazy, like really cool analysis or whatever. And then it turns out, and I was using that to make my blog, and it turns out that guy was in Philly.
Oh.
So then I talked to him, and that guy's Patrick, and that's how Retro Game Audio started.
That's amazing.
The podcast that I was doing for years. So it was the other guy who was talking about this in the country actually just happened to be in the same city as me, and we were like on parallel paths. It was like, it's such a small world sometimes.
That's
how I got into it. And
yeah,
I never was really into the performance aspect of it. I didn't even really know the performance thing, and I thought it was flatly when I first walked in there. I'm like, what are people? Why? Like, this is like a dance party, and we're like, what the heck is going on in here? But then I started to get a little bit more into it, and that's kind of how it started. I just played some open mics and started making new compositions, and the rest is history.
Wow, that's amazing. And you mentioned Small World. I should mention that we actually didn't meet like through the community, because I won't name names or anything. I won't give people's addresses out. But your wife and my wife were best friends growing up, and like way back. Like I watched a video of like them at some like church thing or whatever, and they were like 3. So it's kind of insane. And so I was dating at the time my now wife. And you started dating, and then like my wife's friend. It's weird not to use names. And then like very shortly thereafter, we had our wedding, and she brought you as her +1. And when we were like, wow, she's bringing that guy she just started dating, But I mean, there's nothing weird about that. We were just like, I think that's one of the first times we probably met you. Maybe a little bit before that, but it was just so funny because I don't think for a long time we knew that we kind of were in similar communities and we knew similar people until a bit later, because then you maybe would come over and see like a console I had, or I'd go over to your place and see something. But it's just kind of wild that there was like a point where you would be like, you would go to an event and meet someone, and then it turns out that I know that person too. And I think around the time of like Sonic Mania and stuff, like some of the people working around that project, like you knew them and I knew of them. So it was just all these really funny coincidences there. I don't know. I just thought I'd bring that up, but it's bizarre. It's really weird.
It was like, I think that, and the thing that that I always start to think about though is that, the reason we didn't know that each other were nerds is because we were trying to be secret nerds, like cool nerds. Yeah. Like, we're nerds, but like we're not really nerds. We're just like, we're like cool, like we do these other things. Like, I'm just gonna keep this door over here closed, because I'm not gonna be a nerd. And it's like, then like it starts to leak out a little bit because it's like, I knew what SEGAbits was. Like, I've been on there.
Right.
I've played before, like, so it was like so funny. I never put like 2 and 2 together, until we started talking about it. And like I've been part of, what was the Sega community? There's a couple other ones back in the day, like way back then. It was like what, Sonic 15 or something like that. I was definitely on forums for those, and we've probably been in similar circles for like 20 or 30 years and didn't even know about it.
Right.
So it's just such a random, such a small world.
It's bizarre, yeah. And I like you mentioned the secret nerds, because that's kind of where I'm at, and I think I'm going to remain. I'm in my basement now. You can't see it, but this is all Star Wars. It scares people when they see how much it is facing me. Behind me, it's actually not that much Sonic stuff. In my opinion, like when people look at this, they go, "Wow, look at your huge Sonic collection." I'm like, there are people who fill rooms with this stuff. This is pretty much the extent of mine, until they go into the room over there, and then they see that the room over there is also filled. And I don't know if it's like a mental thing, but to me, I look at all this stuff and it doesn't seem like a lot. And if anything, it doesn't seem like enough. And so in my mind, I'm actually holding back. And it's all the other people who have too much stuff. And my wife said to me about a week ago, she's like, you've taken over the basement. The basement is now yours. And I'm like, but you weren't doing anything with it. Like, I don't want to be sexist, but like, it's like women, they got their shoes, and the shoes take up the entire shoe rack, and they have the thing on the back of the door, and we don't say anything about it, but they've got a lot of shoes. And then here I am with all this stuff, and this stuff's actually, I'm using this stuff, unlike the shoes that aren't being worn. I've got, like, okay, so I'm not like playing with those action figures, but they're there. I can see them every day. There are dozens of pairs of shoes. There's a bin back there of shoes. And sure, there's like 12 bins of my stuff as opposed to one bin of her shoes. But I'm thinking about those things right now. I'm thinking of the Ghostbusters toys or whatever I've got back there in a bin. So it's funny though. But yeah, I keep all of this very secret down here. So when people come over and they're on the first floor, they don't see almost any sign of anything. They'll be like, "Oh, you have a few game consoles," and there's like a little stack of games, and that's it. It's weird. This is like the Gamer Dad podcast now, but
it's funny because I feel like when we were kids, though, it wasn't like desirable to be a gamer. So you kind of like, the way that you lived was like you just kind of pretended you weren't, and then like you hung out with your gamer friends. Like that's kind of how like the lunchroom table worked. Like you could talk to certain people about games, and there's some people you didn't. And then there was like some of your friends were just like only games all the time. And you're like, oh, but those are the nerds. And it's,
right.
Like you can't figure it out. Like
Right, but I think also in grade school you had your franchise that you liked, and then you all liked video games, and maybe you had different consoles, but you didn't judge each other on the consoles. It was more like a perk to have like a core group of friends and you all had different consoles.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But like my core group of friends, I was the Star Wars guy. My friend, one of my friends was the X-Files guy, one was the Jurassic Park guy, one was the Aliens guy. And it was just kind of cool because we'd go to each other's houses and we'd get to play with like the compound play set for Jurassic Park, or we'd get to play with some of my Star Wars things, and we all liked video games. But then I feel like as we got older, some of us like now, like in our 30s, they'll have like, one of the guys I know, he has a bar in his basement, and there's like an Ecto-1 license plate, and that's like his collection. That's like the remnant of his childhood. He still, has the jumpsuit for Halloween, but that's about it. But then when it comes to video games, he'll remember them, but he won't have them on hand. He'll be like, "Oh yeah, I got my daughter a Switch. Did you know they've got the old games on there? Those are great." And I just kind of have to sit there and go, "Yeah, they're really awesome, aren't they? It's fun playing those, yeah." But then I guess there's some people who just, they hold on to the stuff, and they still, not to the physical stuff, but also like the knowledge and the memories and keeping up with it, and having that like core collection still in their house. And I always wonder, like, when am I going to grow out of this? And my wife will ask me, like, when are you going to sell some of that stuff? And I'm like, I'm at that point now where I have to say it's not going to happen, unless there's a massive crisis where I need to like sell the stuff. And even then I tell her, you know what? It's too much effort to sell a copy of Burning Rangers and make $300 when I'd rather just become an Uber driver for a week, than lose my Burning Rangers.
It's so funny though, because it's like, speaking of eBay, like you eBay, I eBay. I'm always on like auctions everywhere. I'm like got my eyes and ears everywhere, looking for deals and rare things all the time. And it's just so funny because it's like I recently, and this is kind of painful for me, but I did it anyway. I got rid of most of my childhood SNES games, and I kept the ones I liked, but I got rid of a lot of the ones that I didn't care for too much. And I just put it in a big bundle and shipped it out because they were just sitting there, and a lot of the batteries didn't work or anything. I have a flash cart for my SNES, so I can play any of the games I want. The nostalgia is just playing the game on the console, feeling it, and on my TV. It's the stuff didn't seem to matter as much. I did the same thing with my Master System collection. I liquidated a lot of my Master System collection because it was just taking up a lot of space, and as I'm the guy who just, there's a bunch of pictures of me with 27 computers on my couch. But at the same time, like, it was just kind of like, it wasn't like I was growing out of it. I was just kind of trying to be smarter about it. It's like, I don't know. I did the same thing with like my Magic cards a long time ago. I was like, I'm going to keep the ones I know are valuable. And like, what am I doing with this huge box of commons? What am I doing with this? There's no point in carrying this box of commons all over the place. So I gave it to my brother, and then I kind of take the cards I need when I need to. So it didn't sell it. It's not in my house anymore. But I get it. It's just like there are certain things that you have to hold on to. I had an NES when I was a kid. I sold my NES at a garage sale to buy a 33.6 modem because I wanted to be able to hook to the internet better. So I sold all my childhood games. So when I rebought a lot of those, like recently, it didn't have any nostalgia for me. Those are just games I rebought. So I just ended up selling them.
That's
I
really
just kind of went on a sell-off, But like my original copy of Final Fantasy 3/6, like I'm not selling that. I'm never selling that.
That's
copy of Shining Force 2, nope, not selling my copy of Shining Force 2. I don't care. And some of my rare stuff, like you said, it's just not worth the effort and hassle. By the time eBay takes their cut, by the time everyone takes their cut, they're not. It's not really worth anything. A lot of these games are worth $20, and by the time everyone takes their cut, you're making $8, and you have to wait in the line at the post office.
Right.
And I keep telling that to my wife. That's why I ended up having to, basically make a bundle and sell everything at the same time. And it's just not worth the effort. For
the way I look at some of those games that when we do the Sega Talk every other week, George and I will like look at the price of the game now, and more often than not, the prices are going up. And I'll be like, wow, this copy of, I'll just throw it out there again, like Burning Rangers, it's going for like $500 now. And to me, that's not the value of the game. That's the price I'd have to pay to get the game back into my collection. Yeah. But at the same time, I don't look at that price and go, well, if it's a little lower, I might buy it. Like if I don't own it, because I wouldn't say I'm done collecting, but I'm done spending more than the original retail price. I can't do that, and that's kind of a rule I've set for myself. If the game is more than what I suspect it cost at retail, like $50, $60, I'm not doing it. And it has really helped me. But then at the same time, it'll be 2 a.m. and I'll be like, oh, there's a Ninja Turtle figure with all the accessories. It's only $75. And then I'll wake up the next morning, I'm like, oh God, I did buy it. And I won the auction. But, I mean, it is what it is.
That's, a lot of my MSXs are that way, where I get the notification at Japanese midnight, and I'm just like, I haven't seen this one before. It's a little bit rare. I know there was only a couple of these made. I will just put in, 20,000 yen or something like that, and we'll just see where it goes. And then I wake up the next morning, it's like, you won. I'm like, oh, well, I'll just have to figure out how to explain this.
Yeah, a recent one for me.
I'm in the doghouse again.
A recent one for me that we've talked about, and I'm having an idea right now. I'll pitch it to you in a second. But the Sega printer, the pre-fun, which is such a strange piece of hardware. When you search like Sega Retro, it'll always kind of appear on that list at the very bottom of like suggested articles or related articles, like other hardware. And it's a printer that was released, and it was meant to be used for both the Saturn and the Pico, which I guess were just like the consoles at the time, but it was sold to the Japanese, and the idea was that it had the ability to pause your screen even though the console was still playing. and then print what was on the screen. And you could also print like what was on your TV, like different TV shows. Very strange piece of hardware, but I got it for maybe a little over $100, like complete in box, which is actually a really good price now because I think they're going up because there's only like a handful of them that are usually for sale. I mean, I'd love to have you back on like in a month or two, and we could like I could just put a table right here and we could play with it and talk about it because I've never hooked it up. Be kind of fun. but yeah, it's just I feel like there's some things you got to go for because you're probably never going to find them again. And if the price is right. Plus, I don't know, in terms of eBay and PayPal, they've got those things now where it's like pay in 4. So for me, I'm like, I'm not spending $100. I'm spending $25, and then 2 weeks, $25. It's like the mafia coming to your door, and they go, they're here for the collection, but the difference is I can't hold back. They have to pull it from my account. So it's, I don't know. I want to jump back into your music here. So I have this. Let me know if I'm on the right page. So this is your SoundCloud.
Okay.
Is this your preference for people listening to your music?
That or Bandcamp, ap0c.bandcamp.com, I believe. Or is it? Yeah, I think it's ap0c.bandcamp.com.
Yeah, I brought that up here too. So we've got your music, your merch, a community, a bunch of people talking about you. Look at that.
Oh boy, there's a community. Oh no.
What is that? Okay, it's people talking. It's messages from you. That's cool. Okay. Walk me through some of these albums here, and maybe if the internet's working in our favor, we can listen to a few tracks. So I'm looking here at Fieldwork. Is this the latest release from you?
Yeah, and that's just kind of like a bunch of B-sides. There is a lot of Sega stuff actually in there. The other ones are mainly, Christopher Crescent Isle is a Sega soundtrack, and the other ones are mainly NES. So probably Fieldwork is the way to go to find something that would be FM. Okay,
great. So I see a lot of options here. Off the top of your head, is there one that you would like me to play?
Let's see. From there... Sorry, I'm actually watching the simulcast here, so I can see the names of my tracks.
No problem.
That will help me. Let's see. Oh, it's so small on my screen. You know what? It might make more sense to just go to SoundCloud, honestly, because I think I have more on there. Okay. I'm thinking.
I'm over on SoundCloud.
Yeah.
Here, I have Brock. Should we just play a Brock track? That's really hard to say. Real quick.
Yeah. Why not?
So we have the Sage Expo Demo 2020 OST. I'll just throw that on here real quick.
Yeah, any of that stuff should be fine. Just some examples.
All right, so that's just a brief sampling there. So, this is your latest project. It's not at Sonic Amateur Games Expo this year, but it was last year. It got a lot of attention from what I saw. A lot of people really enjoyed what they saw, but they also enjoyed what they heard. So, the game I should mention, it's from a SEGAbits contributor, Aki. He's taking this Sage off, but he is still at work on the game, and he tapped you to do. Are you working on all of the music for the game?
Yeah, and at this point, actually, it's probably over an hour of music.
Wow.
There's like 40, I think there's like over 40 tracks. There might even be an hour and a half of music when it's all said and done. So, we've been working on this game together since 2013 or 14. So there's been a ton of output. There's like original tracks for everything you can possibly imagine, from every shop to every world map to, every level, every boss. Like, so it's a lot of work. And that's why it's kind of funny. I'm always like, I am working on games, I promise. It's like this is going to be a massive soundtrack. And it's really exciting. Yeah, I'm doing everything from the music to the sound effects, and it's all recorded off console. So every single thing you hear in the entire game has been recorded off console, from every jump to every, one up to, and, everything you hear is definitely off console, which is cool.
That's awesome. And as far as like direction from him, I hear some tracks that very much evoke some Sega tunes that I've heard in the past. There's, I believe, Brock's Beach House sounds very much like a certain soundtrack bit from Outrun. Were you given direction as to like make this sound like this, or just like kind of go crazy? What kind of working relationship have you had with Aki?
It's been just kind of like, find what you're looking for in there. A lot of times, like a lot of the earlier stuff, I just kind of threw things at the wall to see if he was into it. For the Beach House, he told me what it was, and he's like, I need to make wave sound effects. I'm like, I know what we're doing. You can't stop me. I know exactly what we're doing for this. PM. We're not stealing anything. It's a completely different melody.
Yeah, I clicked it here so people can hear it.
Yeah.
There's
even wave. If you wait to the end, there's actual wave sound effects.
That's what I clicked ahead to. I just love that sound.
And a lot of it has been studying these things. Like, I recreated the waves from Last Wave. I mean, it is the exact wave form. So like, I have an instrument that I can hold down that makes those waves, which is really cool. I spent a lot of time on that. But that's what's so fun about this, because he's spending a lot of time trying to make it look like, an earlier Sega Genesis game, and we're spending a lot of time making the sound correct for that. So, we kind of egg each other on. In a lot of cases, what I write, he wants it to be better than what I wrote.
That's interesting.
So there's actually, so there's been a lot of tracks that I've I could probably fill an entire B-side album, something like that, with tracks that we've just decided didn't work. And a lot more of that we can talk about when the game actually comes out, because there's some really funny stories I could tell about certain tracks. But yeah, we try to make sure that it's the best that's possible. So there are some tracks do hit the cutting room floor, quite a few actually, but it's been kind of fun because it's really challenging me to make sure it's the right fit. He has a very good opinion, very good ear for what he's looking for. So.
Have you been in talks with him about potentially releasing like a physical release of the soundtrack when the game comes up? I've talked to him a bit offline. I don't know what his exact plans are, but I have asked, like, are you doing Kickstarter? I don't know if he's said that or not. Any insight from your end, though, as to if you think there's going to be... I mean, I don't know if we're going to see a vinyl. That'd be kind of wild, but...
Yeah, I don't think there'd be a vinyl for it. But, I mean, physical releases would be easy enough for that. I know that it'll at least be on Bandcamp. That's the plan. That's what the contract says. It's on Bandcamp. So there'll be at least a Bandcamp release for it. But, maybe there'll be a CD version, or vinyl would be amazing. But it's, it's one of those things where it's like you can put a feather in your cap if you have something on vinyl, especially if it's like your own work and all your own work. So we'll see. Well, I mean, we'll see how everything's received, and there's demand. That's definitely something. I think cassette would be fun too, like a cassette with a couple tracks on it would be cool.
Oh, that would be awesome.
I've already talked that would be really funny to do, like get some friends together and do like one of those super arranged tracks. Like, how like there'd be like this like weird, bizarre arranged version of like just some Pac-Man game or something, and like all these guys like went way into it, and it was just like on a cassette in like Namco's library, like Namco Classics 1, and it's just like the Pac-Man theme, like with like crazy sound effects and all this reverb. Like I'm hoping that we can do something like that, because that would be really, really, really funny. Just a good nod to that era of those kind of like weird cassettes and weird arrangements. There's so many of them out there. That would be really
awesome. I also have some other ones here. We'll play one more track. My only concern is that I don't know how it's sounding to the people listening, so I don't want to like scare them. But I think in the past it sounded really good. So let's see here. I have here we have YM 2612 and other FM tracks. So there's only 8 here. What could I pick from here out of them?
Probably, if you want to go with the one that's the moneymaker here, it's Vitriol Hammer.
All right, let's get that up here right now. That's awesome. That's really good. You've got some little sounds in there that definitely remind me of things I've heard back in the day. That's really great. There's some sounds that come from the YM 2612 chip that have always stuck with me. One of them is the you hear it a lot in some of the Sonic 1 tracks, I want to say, where it's almost like a wee 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 wee. It's almost like it's I think it might be in Sonic 2 actually, when it's in that like mountainous, and I'm just blanking on the track. It's Sonic 2 is my favorite game and I can't remember. But it's like Hilltop, and there's like
that filter effect. It's really cool.
Yeah,
Love
there's
that.
lots of cool little tricks there. What is your favorite sound to get out of those chips when you're working on like either FM or YM 2612?
It's always the slap bass. There's nothing like that like nasty kind of like slap bass. Like the sound is just like, I mean, I'm addicted to it, and I think a lot of composers from that era were. It like slap bass is in like almost everything you could think of. That and it's just like, it just sounds good. Bass just sounds good. Also, like you can get some interesting things. Like if you think of Castlevania Bloodlines, you can get some really orchestral sounds too. Castlevania Bloodlines is like a masterwork of FM work. It's all original instruments. Castlevania Bloodlines uses no drum samples. All the drums are FM in there. So the Sega Genesis has the capability of using one sample. So like, the sonic drum that like it's used in like, you can use an actual sample, like pre-sampled, someone hit a snare and they put it onto the console. For Bloodlines, all the drums you hear are completely made of instruments that were completely designed with the algorithm. So like everything in there is just like, pre-made, which is like a labor of love. Not a lot of games did that.
Right.
And so it just sounds amazing. Like, and just the way that it's all kind of set up with all this really orchestral, like kind of like lush instruments. There's really no soundtrack like it that I can think of. I really like that soundtrack, and I can see the logo for it, but it's just eluding me. Maybe it'll come to me later. There's a couple other ones like you could remember Hilltop Zone, so this is my moment here. What's with the rings? It's like power something. You get rings, and I don't remember. It's kind of like an Altered Beast. It kind of looks like Altered Beast, but you have rings, and like it has some really quirky music, and it's just like eluding me the name of it. I can see the title screen and everything, but whatever, it's fine.
Maybe it'll come back to you. The last few things I want to talk about before we close out the show. You mentioned kind of at the top of the episode, an episode, I guess this is our series now, that you worked in like different aspects of video game sound, not just music, but kind of sound, helping maybe with the technical side of things. When I talk about, and I'll plug it again, Sega Talk, when we talk about the music, often we'll talk about a composer and these people will appear like in a handful of credits. They appear still to be working, but we have no idea what they're doing to put food on the table. And a notable one was, and I don't have his name in front of me, but it was the Ghostbusters Genesis soundtrack, where he really only did Master System versions of famous arcade stuff, like I believe Space Harrier, and then he worked on like the sound effects for some games, and that was about it. He never really came back and did like a major Genesis game that was his own soundtrack. So like, if you're some notable person from the 90s or the 80s who's worked on a soundtrack, like what would you say the common sort of career path is for these guys and girls, and like how is it a career? Like, you know, like, I mean, I don't know, I throw one out here right now, Hideki Naganuma, like I know he's making music, but I can't fathom how it's something sustainable when he's known for a game from 2001 and an indie title coming up. You know what I mean?
I mean, a lot of these people are just working at companies now. A lot of them have moved on to different aspects of just the business career. Like a lot of people who worked for these game companies, it was just another gig. It was just another job. They were, you know, composers then weren't paid. Like I'm an independent contractor in every game I work on, but they were just working for the company, you know. Here's a game, putting it in front of you. I'm going to stamp it. Here you go. Make the music. Okay. Next, like some of them didn't even know what they were working on. It was just from 9 to 5, I'm working on music and then I go home. So like, that's why I guess like, you know, I remember Mohammed Talar, who is the person who does Brave Wave and Brave Wave Productions, which just kind of started digging up some of these like classic composers, and they were just shocked that people were interested. Like, what do you mean? Like, some of them were ashamed of their own work. I won't, you know, like get into any of the particular composers, but they're like, why do you want to talk to me? I did that like 25 years ago, and like I've totally moved on and completely forgot what games I worked on, and it doesn't matter to me. Like, it was just a job. But then, like, you know, they had no clue that if they go to like American YouTube, there's like 40 metal bands like all trying to play their music. You know, they had no clue. You know, so it's like an appreciation, or kind of a renaissance for the appreciation of some of these, like, as I call them, the old masters who did this when it wasn't like necessarily a super glamorous thing. And a lot of the only places you'll find these people are on wikis somewhere. You'll have no clue where they went, because it's really just like after like 1996, when in some cases when there was no more FM sound, they're just gone because they were FM sound composers.
That's a very good point.
Or they were really good at these things, and then it's kind of like, you know, moving from the silent pictures to the talkies. Some people didn't make it. You know, it's exactly the same thing. And once you start to get to Red Book Audio and you start to get to like Lush and like real sounds and real bands, some of those guys were just not that. You know, they didn't cut it, or it's too much work. You know, it's like learning. It's like you're working a job for 30 years and then someone tells you, okay, you have to learn a new programming language. It's like, I could just quit too. You know, and I feel like some people got to that point. But most of the composer interviews I've read from that era, that's really it. Some people really became like rock stars with it and just kept pushing it. But you know, a lot of composers that we talk about were just scrappers. Were just people who had their moment in the sun, this was their chance to write one soundtrack or two soundtracks, and they moved on. You know, because there wasn't a career they wanted to. They were just, you know, a lot of times programmers at like Capcom were the people who were doing the sound effects. And they were programmers. They weren't sound people. They were just trying to mess around with the chip to make it sound like something.
That's interesting.
You know, I think that's why a lot of them are just, you know, probably working a salary job now. You know,
or some of them aren't even working in sound. You know, it was like a side gig, and I know, for example, I don't think it's music related, but like the Yut Saito, Seaman. You know, his work, he worked in games, but then he went on to do a lot of AI stuff, and then it gets integrated into different technologies that's not even game-based. There's also the You Don't Know Jack developer And I believe that license or that IP went to a different studio, where maybe some of the talent went, but the core staff and the company itself that developed those games is now making, I believe, like interfaces for like healthcare, and I think they're based around where I am here in Chicago. And so when I was looking for jobs, I was like, oh, it'd be cool to work for the company that makes you don't know Jack. What do they do? Oh, they make interfaces for healthcare systems. I mean, but I guess if the money's right and you can move over to a different industry, that's what you do. So who would you say now are some of the best composers? And I wouldn't say like people who have been doing it for years, but some of the best new talent that you've come across or I
mean, there's so many obvious ones, like Lena Raine is really great, really great composer who did. She just recently did that game with the paintbrush. I'm sorry, it's like 11 something here, so my brain is kind of
that's okay
foggy. But the Chicory, she just did Chicory.
Okay.
There's T, of course. There's a lot of impressive. I mean, the folks from there's a crop of really good musicians from like the last 5 years that have kind of come onto the scene. You got your classics like Vert and Jay Kaufman, people like that. But like Lena's kind of new. Everything that T is working on is just amazing. There's a lot of different. You even have Koshiro writing new stuff, and he's like old, but like it's like brand new Koshiro stuff that's like totally destroying. So like in terms of composers, those are you can't go wrong with either of them.
Nice. Yeah, I've really enjoyed, I think in the past few years, the soundtrack for Piku Niku. I think it's let me look it up here. Caleb Bowen, I want to say. I don't know if you've listened to that one, but I don't know. There's lots of earworms in that one. It kind of has a classic vibe to it, but I don't know. It seems like video game music in general has gone from having these dedicated sound systems to basically all, I mean, obviously they're not MP3s, but you could slap them all onto an album and it's the same sound that you're getting on a CD quality sound pretty much. But now we've reached that point where even though it's the same sort of technology, we're almost moving backwards. It's like make music that sounds like I'm playing on a Genesis, but we're most obviously not using that that technology. And there's been some missteps. For example, I would say the Sonic 4 soundtrack. It's very clear that they were trying to make it sound retro, but they had the tools not to, but they didn't push it far enough either way. So it almost sounds like a poor man's retro and a poor man's like CD quality sound. I don't know. I mean, what would you like? What kind of advice would you give to someone who either is composing music or wants to get into composing music, and they're tasked with making retro game audio? Like, what would you say is the best way to go about that sort of process?
It's really doing a lot of listening. Because when someone wants a retro sound, someone has an idea of a retro sound, and especially if it's a job where it's like, hey, do retro sound, that usually means that they have a retro sound in their head. And most folks that I've worked with, whether it's been a one-off for Y2K or for any of these other projects I've been on over the years, where someone wants a particular kind of track, they're usually a fan of one or two games, and that's what they're kind of looking for. And especially with FM, it's kind of like they're looking for, they could be like, well, I'm really a big fan. A great example is, the Rock Crocodile devs are a real big fan of Quackshot. So it's like, can you listen to Quackshot and give me some ideas? They also love Shinobi too. So it's like, do you have any ideas? Like anything that kind of sounds like that, So, I really think that just thinking about that and listening to the old masters, especially if you're tasked with trying to sound like them, is a good way to start. So just having a general knowledge of that stuff, where to go, how to make instruments, and how to be flexible, it will really help you on the job. And that's whether you use trackers or whether you use sound fonts. There's fantastic sound fonts in different systems, like FM, FM Drummer Plug, FM, something like that, that is really authentic too, that you can use. It's just honoring as much as you can the old tradition. will go a long way. I mean, there's certain ways, like you can update it a little bit. I think that I've heard plenty of FM soundtracks that are like, you know what, I'll use 16 channels instead of 6 or something like that. And as long as you do it right, it's going to sound good, and as long as you're, I guess, really having some kind of reverence for the original sound, it'll come out, I've heard plenty of tracks, like you said, where someone's tried to create a retro sound and it's just like, it doesn't get it. You know what I mean? And I think that a lot of that comes from the sensibilities you hear from some of those older things. Like, it's perfectly fine with taking, chiptune and adding some reverb and making it sound a little bit more updated and pleasing to the ear. But if you're not tasked with that, and if you're tasked with making it sound like exactly what you would have heard in 1992, there's a difference between that and creating a more modern sound. And just really understanding what those limitations were, no matter how you used to make it, goes a long way. I mean, I don't know if the audience appreciates it that much. People are like, "Oh, I appreciate that," but there's got to be a couple nerds out there who are like, "Oh, they did the right way." Like Outrun, the Outrun re-release for 3DS or whatever. They did the extra songs they added. They did the exact right way. The songs were they're so good. They're so good, and they did a great job with them. And like, you're like, "Oh, this is the right sound," but those weren't composed back then, right? They were. So it's really like, that's exactly a great example of like, hey, we made new content for something that's older. So
M2 definitely. That's kind of their mantra. Like, they'll make Fantasy Zone 2W, and they also made the Game Gear Micro, which had LS 3, I want to say, which is a new game but made on the original hardware. So they very much are in the camp of, we want to make it as authentic as possible, use the original hardware. But then you also have, games coming out that do want that retro sound. But, if you can pull it either way, like if you can pull it a little more modern, use modern sensibilities, modern sounds when you can, if it sounds good, then why not do that? Like, if the games director, whoever's, paying the bills, is saying, you know what, don't be afraid to not make this, one-to-one with the original stuff. I don't see a problem with that. I do know, like, I saw a funny meme last week, I wish I had it on me, but where it was about people making pixel graphic games. And it was like, show this to your pixel graphic game friend to make them mad. And it was like, it was all pixel graphics, but then one bit was just a little askew. Because they basically took, I mean, obviously with modern hardware you can do that. You can have all the pixels are there, but then you have a bit on top that's slanted. That's impossible on original hardware. You can't do that, but you can do that. And so it's a strange sort of question of, well, we can't do that because it doesn't look right or it doesn't sound right, but we can do that because we're using modern technology, and this is all it's a fake, it's all fake in the end.
It really is just kind of like, what are you attempting to do? If you are attempting to make something that looks authentic, then try to make sure that but if you're going bonkers and just like making it funny, like, there's certain things in like Rock Crocodile, even in the demo, where we're just like, we're going to just break the fourth wall. We're just, we're going to put sideways pixels. We don't really even care, because it's an homage as much as it is supposed to be authentic. And that's funny. You can use it there. But if you're like sitting there like, mine's all pixel authentic and everything, and then, you make simple mistakes like that, like, that is really just how you package it, I could have just used not the Sega Genesis to make the music for it. It was my artistic choice to do that for Rock Crocodile.
Right.
And it would have been fine too. It really would have been. I could have done something a little bit more modern, or, something more modern Sega sounding. Would have been fine. Like, for that game, like something more Sonic Adventure-y, it would have been perfectly fine. But it all depends on what you're trying to go for, and you have to insist on it. Like, art has to insist upon itself. I always say that. And like, you beat someone over the head with your with your knowledge and sound, and making your reverence for the original material, and it'll come out. Like, there's so many labors of love for like that are like NES specific graphics and stuff like that, and they don't even play on NES, but there's like, we made sure that every glitch and stupid thing that could possibly happen with this game, like, was it Mega Man 9 like had slowdown in it still, which is like insane, or was it 10 one of the newer Mega Man releases still had slowdown, even though it's on a modern console, it still had slowdown if you got hit. Which is, they're like, well, it's part of the game, we're going to give you that. that's a labor of love. You don't have to do that. Like, you could make it so there's no slowdown. It'd be better probably, right? But you're so
Right.
used to that, and it's such a classic thing that those little details matter, you know?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And are there any like audio glitches that would be common on the Genesis or Mega Drive that you can think of when it comes to like performance on the original hardware? I always felt like the sound was pretty good. Well, here's one I'll throw at you. So in Tailspin for the Genesis, there are moments where if there's like an enemy's like hopping around and there's too many of them, like the sound will hang up. Like it'll be like dunk dunk ding,
Yeah.
ding ding ding. Like, why is that happening? Is it?
It's just processing power. There's too many sprites. The 68,000 processor is trying to control the sprites, the music, and everything at the same time. A lot of the stuff that I write for Sega Genesis could not actually be played on Sega Genesis while sprites were moving because it's too big. And a lot of the stuff that people write for new hardware, or for old hardware, is that's the case. You actually couldn't play it in a game because it's way too big. Games were like 64K, and some of my, for Nintendo or whatever, and some of my sound files were 286K or something like that, approaching 1 megabyte. And that's not going to work. that's not optimized. I had a project that was supposed to go on a cart, and we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get it on a cart, and it just was not going to work because the way that we developed all the tracks or whatever, we'd have to go back and redo every single one of them because every single track, all 7 of the tracks, were bigger than the largest size cart we could find. So you couldn't even put one on a track. Another glitch, like thinking about glitches, another one, like sometimes when you beat the stages at the end of Sonic levels, like the sound gets all weird. Like I'm trying to remember, like it'll play like a hissing or some weird sound, like especially if you pop the kings or whatever, like it'll make like weird sound effects and just kind of like keep playing that until you're like done the victory theme plays or whatever. Or it'll just play the music over the top of it. Or like the glitches you can get with like if you finish the stage as supersonic and then you can kind of like become supersonic while you're running off the screen and it like locks you up or whatever.
Right. That's fun.
Yeah.
So before we close things out, where can people find your work? I know we just looked at some of the sites there, but where can you be found on social media? This is your time to plug away.
All right, so I'm on Twitter as we can probably put it in the chat, but it's A_P_0_C. That's my Twitter account. That's usually where I post most of my updates. I have Facebook, but it's not really. It's very hard to get out to anyone from there. So that's usually where I'm at. I post most of my new releases on Bandcamp at apoc.bandcamp.com. SoundCloud gets a little love, but not as much love as it used to. But any updates or anything, really check my Twitter. I have a lot. Like I'm sitting on NDAs for like 4 things that are super exciting. And Dead Horizon 2 is going to be really fun. There's a lot of different things I'm working on that are going to be pretty big. And also working on False Skies too, which is a really cool throwback, Konami era VRC6 NES RPG, which looks really fun. And the music I've written for it is pretty insane. And the guy who's making the game, it's going to be really cool. So I got that coming out. I mean, I just wish, eventually there's going to be a bunch of cool stuff that's coming out, like very, very, very soon. And I've been kind of bursting at the seams here. And eventually I'll just be able to kind of talk about it all. So, but yeah, just follow me on Twitter and I'll definitely, it'll eventually come out. And you can follow me there to watch me, break hardware by accident and gripe about like how much dressing is on my salad and the usual things that happen on my Twitter.
Nice.
So.
Well, I'm really excited for those upcoming reveals, and I'd love to have you back on in the future. It's always fun to chat, and I know we don't, outside of little Facebook conversations, we don't really have anything. I do have a question coming in. I want to put this up here.
Yeah, sure.
So this is just a little question from the chat. It says, so why is it that Golden Axe music and Lightning Force music stops when voiceover comes on?
Because they're using not the actual what's it called? They're using a PCM, a forced PCM, and the forced PCM uses the entire processor to force voice. That's how you can get voice on Sega Master System. Like follow the Miracle Ball, like that whole thing. is like the whole thing just freezes. Or like when Alex Kidd dies on Master System, you know how it just goes like it plays like but like everything stops for a second. You can force sound effects into the system by like literally hijacking the entire system to play something back. And so that's why it has the pause, and that happens in the same case when you're on the Sega Genesis as well. You could like that's how you can have like it have speak entire sentences and do all kinds of cool stuff like that. If you really wanted to, you can use it. The Genesis is capable of playing that, but you have to use all of its power to do it. So same with the Master System, same with the NES too, in a lot of cases.
Nice. Well, without further ado, I guess we're going to wrap things up. So thank you again, Steve, for coming on the show. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And we will be back maybe in 2 weeks. Haven't really decided on which guest we're going to have. But yeah, we'll love to have you back on in maybe a month or two. I don't know. And talk more about the projects you're working on. And I'd love to do some Sega pre-fun printer. I don't know. Play with the format here.
Let's show off some hardware or something. I got all those Mark 3s and Mark 1s, Mark 2s.
That'd be awesome. Yeah, I'd love to do like a show and tell. Yeah, let's do something like that. And so until then, you can check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/SEGAbits. You can support the show, and we've got some perks coming in. I'm thinking of maybe having like a co-host the show with me, and we can talk about something for 20 minutes. Who knows? But Steve, he gets it for free. So that about does it. Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you next time on the SEGAbits Swingin' Report Show Live.